Sue was a little hippie. She liked to smoke weed. She loved to record music. She was a free spirit. Sue was grateful for her house, for everything that she did have. She never took anything for granted.
Oh, I loved her clothes, her makeup, her hair. I mean, I wanted to be like her. Susan was a great part of my life. And then all this ended. And she was at home, minding her own business. What could she have done to deserve something like that? I just wanted to know who did it and why.
Was on patrol in South County. I was assigned to swing shift patrol. When I got the call, just the fact that it was dispatched as an unknown problem was kind of a heads up that this was going to be something out of the ordinary. I imagine that the dispatcher knew but didn't want it to go out over the air as a potential homicide. I took a direct line into the house.
First to arrive, Deputy Steve O'Connor walks into a gut-wrenching scene. A young woman lies dead on the floor in front of him.
Deputy O'Connor, and
she was covered by something. I couldn't tell for certain whether it was a robe or a towel. Her hands were bound behind her back with an electrical cord. Even though you're law enforcement and you see a lot of things that citizens don't see, it's still kind of shocking to see a life just taken away like this.
The woman is Susan Schwarz. She's just 24 years old. Susan's been shot and killed where she should have been the safest, inside her suburban home. The news is more than her family can bear.
My father came to my house in Bothell. He was crying, saying that Sue had been murdered. Sue and I, we were close. She was my sister, best friend. My sister and my mother had a very rocky relationship for many, many years. We had problems at home.
Her mom drank quite a bit at the time. Sue loved her sister and her brother very much, but she just really wanted to get out of that house.
On her 18th birthday, on September 16th, she sat out in front of our house waiting for a ride.
Her boyfriend, Bill Hassler, is the one who rides to her rescue, taking Susan from the clutches of an overbearing mother.
Bill was the way not to live at home. He was her out.
She did what I was going to do not too many years later. She got out. Never saw her mother again.
She escaped her past, but now, 6 years later, she's been robbed of the better future she was so desperately seeking. Veteran detectives Joe Ward and Kenno Christensen from the Snohomish County Major Crimes Unit are assigned to find the person responsible for this horrifying crime.
She was nude, and she was covered with some kind of a cloth. There was a large amount of blood around her head, and her feet were not bound. There's a distinct possibility that there was some kind of sexual contact.
Susan has been shot in the head more than once. What else did this young woman endure, and why? Detectives search the house for clues. Hair, Fingerprints, a weapon, whatever might lead them to the killer.
There was an empty .22 caliber shell casing. There was a live .22 caliber round that was found. There was blood in various spots inside the bathroom. There was hair that was pulled from her scalp. I didn't see any kind of forced entry at all. There was no open windows, no broken glass, no upset furniture, and the house wasn't ransacked. Nothing seemed to be out of place. It appeared as if she was in the bathroom at the time the person came into the house.
There are two frightening possibilities. Either the killer is someone Susan knew, or a stranger came in through an unlocked door while she was in a shower.
She was a very immaculate housekeeper, and I said, this is going to be great because I'm going to find the suspect's fingerprints on something. I fingerprinted everything that I could find in that house. Everything that I thought was the point of entry.
To his surprise, Christensen's search for prints comes up empty, but he does find some other possible clues.
The carpet appeared relatively new and still had quite a bit of plushiness to it. And there were a lot of tread patterns on there. There were smaller footmarks, but we had no idea where they had come from. She was barefoot, so she probably didn't leave footmarks on the carpet herself.
The larger footprints are the size of a man's, likely the killer. But that doesn't explain the smaller prints.
Because of the two different sizes, maybe two people were involved.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Susan's dream of a better life centered on one man,
It smells
her
fantastic.
longtime boyfriend, Bill Hassler. After coming to her aid 6 years earlier, they started building a life together. Bill's in shock after discovering Susan dead, but police have no choice. They have to question him.
Bill was very emotionally distraught. He was tough to talk to. Bill came home from work that day about 4 o'clock.
When he came inside, he noticed a check, was what he told me. He immediately thought that was odd because he had arranged with Miss Schwarz to deposit the check that day.
Sue? He turned around and saw Sue laying on the floor, face down. He runs out of the house, to the neighbor's house.
Bill says he can't imagine why anyone would want to kill Susan. She's a shy person who mostly stays at home.
They treated each other very well. Bill offered her love. He offered her kindness and compassion and gentleness, and she hadn't had that from home, you know. She also took care of the house. She made sure everything was in line and in place.
Broke in, I don't know.
Today, everything isn't in place. Bill Hassler says some of their things have been stolen.
There were several items missing out of the house, and that made it appear as though she surprised a burglar. There was stereo equipment missing from the house. There was something out of a jewelry box in the bedroom, and her wallet was missing as well.
Is this just a burglary gone wrong? For investigators on the scene, something tells them to dig deeper.
It's rare for someone to surprise a burglar and get murdered. It's pretty unusual for that to happen.
Only 4 hours after Susan's boyfriend calls for help, police have a gut feeling that the crime scene is staged to look like a burglary. Could Susan be the target of a more sinister plan?
Smells like weed.
Bill may have been Susan's knight in shining armor, but by no means is he a saint.
Initially, Bill didn't tell us his full involvement in marijuana use and sales. Once he came clean on that, people began to think that it was drug-related, not a burglary gone bad.
Is Bill Hassler, the man who promised Susan a better life, somehow responsible for her horrific death?
Why are you asking this? Why aren't you out looking for the person who killed her? All homicides are brutal, okay? This one was particularly cold-hearted. The perpetrator of this crime was somebody that knew her and went there with the intention of doing exactly what happened. Rather than a burglary gone bad, it immediately reminded me of an execution-type homicide.
Linwood, Washington, a quiet town on the outskirts of Seattle. In 1979, the small suburban community is sheltered from the drugs and violence sweeping through the nearby city. The murder of a young woman who settled here in search of a better life shocks her friends and family.
Why? What could she have done? This tiny, bright, wonderful, friendly person. What could she have done to deserve something like that? I just didn't understand why that would happen to her.
I mean, she always was a comfort to me. I wish she were here and I miss her. But she was my sister. I love her.
She's good people. She never did anything to hurt anybody. She was just a peaceful, happy-go-lucky, help anybody out if they needed it type person. She was just the best.
It certainly didn't appear that there was anybody that had ill will towards Susan. She appeared to be well liked. She didn't have a lot of enemies. She didn't do a lot of things that made people upset. She just kind of lived her life.
Only hours after Susan's murder, detectives think her boyfriend Bill Hassler's drug use is related to her violent death.
I'll ask you more questions about the pot.
Susan's boyfriend smoked marijuana and that she did as well. So that's what police would reasonably take a look at is there some drug connection to this?
Case? You gotta be kidding me.
Bill was a recreational user, dabbling a little bit in marijuana, selling small amounts to support his habit. And also, he worked for an outfit in Bellevue doing floor tile and stuff like that. He was at work that day, and that was easy to verify with his employer.
While the cops don't suspect Bill is intentionally involved in his girlfriend's murder, they wonder if he got in over his head on a bad deal. Is Susan killed in retaliation?
There was a possibility that somebody he had sold marijuana to had come back thinking that he was a bigger dealer than he was and decided that they're looking for a large amount of marijuana to rip off. But I did believe that whoever did this probably knew her or knew Bill.
As the investigation heats up, the only small solace for Susan's family and friends comes from the coroner's report.
They did consider the possibility that there might be a sexual assault, and mostly because she was nude, she was bound, and she was laying down. They took some samples during the autopsy, and those were submitted to the lab, and it was determined that there was no sexual assault.
Right now, neither the autopsy nor the crime scene give police so much as a shred of evidence to help them find Susan's killer.
The most frustrating aspect of it was the lack of physical evidence. There was nothing that we found at the scene that could tie anybody to the murder. So that was a real handicap for us.
Desperate to find any clue to kickstart the investigation, detectives turn to Susan's neighbors for help.
Yes, I live next door.
There was a neighbor who heard something that was described as squealing like a pig about 9:45 that morning.
I heard strange sounds coming from the house.
What the person heard was probably Susan's death.
Police use this information to determine when Susan is killed, but learn nothing else.
If there's anything else, please send a call.
Okay.
Looking for some way to break the case, narcotics detective Barry Fagan hits the seedy side of town.
What I did first was contact all my informants and let them know that there was a murder that occurred in the area and ask them to keep their ear to the ground. Anytime I would arrest somebody, I would ask them, suggesting that if they were to have some information, things might go a lot easier for them. Nothing came up. Nothing worked.
All right, that afternoon, can we just go back into detail?
A year and a half goes by before police decide to roll the dice on a long shot.
He's really far away.
Rookie detective Alan Zerlo is assigned to find a suspicious man seen near Susan's house.
A neighbor had witnessed a young man walking down the street about the time that Susan's murder would have taken place.
He was holding something. It was big and just a tucked towards his arm.
The young man that she saw was carrying some type of object. It appeared to be a fairly large object, longer and cylindrical. She couldn't say exactly what it was. I was tasked with taking that composite, trying to identify that individual and seeing if we could locate him.
Zerlo's efforts pay off. The man he's looking for is identified as Ricky Hartman, a local petty criminal known to be involved with drugs.
It looked like the young man had had a few minor run-ins with the law. He and possibly an accomplice or associate could have been targeting the house for a burglary and maybe didn't realize Susan was home at the time and something got out of hand with Susan.
Somebody there?
It turns out the suspect lives just around the corner from Susan and Bill's house.
I went to the residence. One of the first things I noticed when he met me at the door was a very strong resemblance to the composite.
Hartman insists he has nothing to do with Susan Schwarz's murder. He even agrees to take a lie detector test to prove it.
I questioned him a little more on what he might have been carrying with him at that time. He stated that it wasn't uncommon for him to go to friends' homes and carry his bottle pipe.
The lead gets Zerlo nowhere. Ricky Hartman may be a pothead, but he's no killer. 6 long years go by before Snohomish County detectives get their first promising lead in the Susan Schwarz murder. Another young woman, 28-year-old Molly McClure, is found murdered in her apartment in North Seattle.
There were some features of that were very similar to the features in Susan Schwarz's case. The victim was bound. The victim was found on the floor.
Detective Barry Fagan reads about that crime on a police bulletin. He has just one thought. Susan Schwarz.
When I saw that come across the wire, I got on the phone and I called Seattle. I said, I've got to see your case file and your crime scene photos. It sounds like a mirror image of Sue Schwarz, a case that I have sitting on my desk from 1979.
6 years after Susan Schwarz is found shot to death in Linwood, Washington, a young woman named Molly McClure is killed in similar fashion less than 20 miles away. Seattle detectives take Sherwood Knight into custody. If the same person killed both women, Susan's killer is finally found.
Seattle did an excellent job. They had DNA, had everything they needed, and they scooped up Sherwood Knight and put him behind bars.
As Fagan digs further, he's stunned to find that Sherwood Knight actually has a close connection to Susan Schwarz. Knight's half-brother, Greg Johnson, was married to Susan's best friend, Mary. At one time, Johnson was a part of Susan's inner circle.
Greg was extremely charming, very good looking. I mean, he really was a gorgeous man. And he was fun. He really was. We'd go salmon fishing, camping, go down to the beach, clam digging. I mean, we had fun.
As charming as he is, Greg Johnson and his half-brother have a long criminal history together. Robberies, drugs, assaults. Had Johnson somehow gotten Susan tangled up with his murderous brother?
At that point, I felt that Sherwood was good for it. And I was hoping that I could talk to somebody that would tell me what I needed to know.
Police hope Johnson will turn on his brother for murdering his wife's best friend. They find him in another prison where he's doing time for armed robbery.
Oh, sure.
They contacted Greg, asking him, we think maybe your brother might be involved with this.
Johnson's response is even better than anything Fagan was hoping for.
Listen, I was in the bar. Greg tells me that he was there when Sue was murdered, but he was outside. Him and 3 other people went there in a car. He said that Sherwood and 2 other people went in the house. He heard a snap-like noise from inside the house. They came out with some stolen items from the house, some stereo equipment, put it in the back of the car, and they drove away. Sherwood said to him, "I hope you don't get caught for this one."
Johnson says it isn't until later that he realizes the person his brother killed is actually his wife's friend, Susan Schwarz. And now he wants him to pay.
Okay, what do you see?
Problem is, he's admitting to being at the crime scene, giving Detective Barry Fagan reason to question his statement. Could Johnson be setting up his brother to hide his own involvement?
In order for me to move on either Greg or Sherwood, I needed something to tie them to the crime scene, and I didn't have it. I had no evidence. I had nothing to put them there. I was at a dead end at that point. Being that close, knowing that it's a flip of the coin, which one did it, or were they together, or did they act independently? When you feel in your heart, you know you're right about these 2, but you can't prove it. It's very frustrating.
Without enough evidence to charge either brother, the case is put on the shelf. For an astonishing 26 years, Susan Schwarz's murder remains unsolved, adding to the pain in the hearts of those who loved her.
I think about it a lot. You compartmentalize it a little. You drink too much, but you have to survive. At some point, there has to be a switch in your head that says, I can't let this consume me.
It was definitely different after she was gone. It left a big hole. It destroyed so many people. I mean, no family should have to go through this stuff.
I wanted somebody to answer for it. My sister does not deserve what she got. Being her brother, it was my responsibility to follow it through to where that we got some justice for her. And she would have done the same thing for me.
In 2005, times have changed, and so has the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. They form a cold case team led by Detective Jim Sharp.
Susan's case stood out as one that we thought could be solved. I had pretty much understood that the most likely suspects were Sherwood Knight
and Greg Johnson.
It wasn't really until I met Jim Scharf that things changed.
We thought that Mary would be the person that would know anything if Greg was involved.
Greg Johnson was married to a woman named Mary, and Mary's best friend was Susan from high school. Mary was having some problems in her relationship with Greg.
Our motive was let no man come between us, whatever was going on, you know. She was my priority, I was hers. We were sisters.
Really, Greg? Really?
Mary is still bitter about her time with ex-husband Greg Johnson, even decades after the end of their relationship.
Sue definitely threatened Greg's position. She never liked Greg.
I haven't done anything. We just had a little altercation, a couple's quarrel. Can you just put on the phone, please?
She's not here.
When Mary was having some problems in her relationship with Greg, she confided in Susan.
I don't know why I didn't leave. Because he used to beat the crap out of me.
Why do you want to talk to me?
That's about the same time when Sue helped me get out of there. She'd just say, why are you putting up with this? He's just no good, Mary. You can do better. You can do much better. You don't need that man. You know, and finally she pretty much convinced me that if I didn't get out of there, I was starting to feel like my life was in danger.
Susan may have been shy and easygoing, but she wasn't going to tolerate abuse.
Calling my house.
Not in her life, and not in the life of her friends. And so she convinces Mary to leave Greg Johnson.
Greg was upset that Susan was what he called meddling in his relationship, and he was very angry with her about that.
As long as I had Sue as a friend, you know, I had the emotional backing to go ahead and do anything, including not be with him.
For the first time, detectives have a suspect with a reason to kill Susan Schwarz. Revenge.
Even though Greg was her husband and the father of her child, I think Mary was beginning to see Greg for what he was.
Mary has more than a grudge. She has evidence. A letter she's been holding on to. A feud between two brothers is about to reveal one of them as Susan's killer. In 2009, Susan Schwarz would have celebrated her 54th birthday. 30 years after her murder, her best friend finally summons the courage to offer up evidence implicating her abusive ex, Greg Johnson, and his half-brother, Sherwood Knight.
She gives me the letter that Sherwood sent to Greg. In the letter, Mary understood that Sherwood was implicating himself and Greg in the murder of Susan.
The letter said, Greg, you told me you were going to help me, and you haven't done anything, and if you don't get me an attorney within a month, I'm going to submit this letter.
The letter's written a little cryptically, but Sherwood tells Greg that if he doesn't come up with the money, the $2,000, to help him get out of jail, then Greg can replace him in jail.
There were no details in the letter that implied what the crime was. The letter refers to your and Mrs. Millman's secret.
Detectives don't even know who the mysterious Mrs. Millman could be. They are certain that either one or both of the brothers are involved with Susan's murder. But which one do they charge? Cold case detective Jim Scharf doesn't have enough evidence to charge either brother. He tries a new trick.
We found out about a tool that we could use called cold case playing cards. By, I believe it was May of 2009, we had our own deck. We had put them out in all the prisons in the whole state.
5,000 decks of cards, with unsolved murder victims as the face cards, are sent out. The hope is the right card makes it into the right hands.
Sherwood had been playing with the cold case cards in prison. He found the Queen of Hearts. It was Susan Schwarz. He said, I know something about this. That was one huge moment in the case.
Seeing the Queen of Hearts only reminds Sherwood Knight how angry he is at his brother for refusing to help him. He decides it's time to talk.
Interview with Sherwood Knight.
We go out and we talk tonight and we tape record a statement from him, giving us all these details.
I know who killed Susan Schwarz. How do you know?
Sherwood was telling us how he was down fishing at the pier, and Greg Johnson drives up in this red car and says, I need you to tell everybody that I was down here fishing with you today.
I know what? And he said that he killed Susan Schwarz.
Sherwood Knight says he may be guilty of covering for his brother, but he did not kill Susan.
Now we've got Sherwood telling us that Greg did it. Greg was telling us that Sherwood was the one that did it.
Two likely suspects, and Detective Sharp still doesn't know which of the brothers is lying.
What's this? It's a letter I wrote to my brother.
Sherwood and Greg never knew that we had the letter. We confronted him with it and asked him to explain it.
And who's Miss Milne? That's Shelly Martin, his girlfriend. Shelly Martin. Shelly Martin. And that was his girlfriend, right? Yes. She was there in the car.
The code is broken. The mysterious Mrs. Millman is really Shelly Martin. Police now know who she is, but what is her story?
We knew that Shelly was a person that was associated with them during their crime spree.
Please, have a seat.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Definitely.
32 years after Susan's murder, detectives meet with Shelly Martin. They learn she's moved on and wants to leave her dark past behind.
She met Greg at a party. Greg found this young, impressionable girl and kind of took her under his wing. She was pretty infatuated with him. We asked her if she knew if Greg had killed Susan, and she told us she didn't know anything.
Detectives confront her with a piece of evidence that has frustrated them for decades.
There's two sets of footprints on the carpet in this house where this happened. There's a bigger set and a smaller set. And we're wondering now if maybe yours aren't the smaller set.
We have reason to believe you were there.
I asked her, you were there, weren't you?
We always knew that you were involved. That's why we're here.
Shelly is cornered. She's desperate for this to end.
I'm following her like a half a step behind her as she turns over her left shoulder. She whispers, I was there. I was there.
Shelly Martin spills the secret she's been hiding for more than 3 decades. The emotions she's been holding back come pouring out with it.
I tell her, hey, you know, it's okay. We just need to know what happened. And she said, okay, I'll tell you everything.
32 years after Susan Schwarz is tied up and shot in the hallway of her own home, detectives find someone who saw the whole thing. At the time, Shelly Martin was just 17 years old.
Once in a lifetime, you find a person that actually witnessed a murder.
Shelley gives a very compelling description of the events of that day. She described the crime in such amazing detail that you just couldn't come to any other conclusion than that she was there and had seen it happen.
I think he went there to kill her. He went there with that intent. Why he brought Shelley with him, I don't know.
She hadn't been to the house before. She didn't know who lived there. He told her that somebody there owed him some money. He comes out after a short time and he tells her that the woman is in the shower.
Open the door. She's in the shower.
He says, I want you to help me take some money and some pot that's in there.
Got read in the verse. Give us an empty hand to read.
she left him, he was still holding this electrical cord in his hand.
Shelley went back out to the car. She sat there for a while, and then she started thinking, he's up to no good. Something bad's going to happen to this woman. I should go back inside the home.
What are you doing in my house?
You ruined everything. He started calling her out on causing him and Mary to break up. You can't mind your own business, can you, Susan?
She's fighting. She's talking back to him. She's very angry at him. She's not cowering at all.
Just quit mind your own business.
And then Shelley actually saw Greg grab Susan and wrestle with her on the floor. And at that point, I believe Shelley describes that things changed dramatically with Susan. She began pleading for her life. She began asking him, please don't hurt me, don't kill me, don't do anything to me. And then she describes that Greg shot her in the head.
Susan Schwarz pays for her loyalty to a friend with her life.
Greg told Shelley that if she said anything that he'd kill her.
So get in the car. All right. You've carried out.
She'd been holding this for 32 years, and it's been a burden to her whole life. In her mind, she was either going to go to jail for the rest of her life or be killed by Greg Johnson. After we got the information from Shelley, we knew that we had all the probable cause in the world to arrest Greg and take him to trial and make this stick.
Cold case detectives track Greg Johnson down to an inner-city halfway house in Seattle.
It was enjoyable to slap those handcuffs on his wrists.
Johnson is charged with the murder of Susan Schwarz. Faced with eyewitness testimony, he pleads guilty. 32 years after the murder, a group of tenacious cops and a deck of cards bring justice to a young woman killed for standing up for her best friend. On March 23, 2012, Greg Johnson is sentenced to life in prison.
I called Mary Johnson and told her that Greg was in custody, and they called Shelley and told her that Greg was going to jail, and that was very satisfying.
If anybody ever deserved to spend the rest of their life in prison, it's Greg Johnson. He's never stated any ounce of remorse, even at the trial.
The desire to help her friend should not have cost Sue her life.
When he made his admission, he tried to make it seem like my sister deserved what she got, and there's nobody that will ever convince me she ever did anything to him to deserve what he did to her.
I think he took an innocent person's life, my sister who I love dearly. She didn't deserve it. And if it were up to me, he should have to pay with his life.
You only made a couple friends like that in your whole life. She was like my sister. And I just always feel like if she never would have met me, she'd still be alive.